welcome back to the channel, and we're here with our Blood Angels captain from the Combat Patrol. I think you can buy him separately as well. I base coated this and started putting blocking some colours in before I realised I should be recording this. So here we are. We've got some Mephiston red, got a little bit of this dark aluminium I'm trying from Vallejo, and we've just used a bit of black on the gun casing, and again primed the cloak. So let's start off with a little bit of mahogany, and we'll just block in those colours. I'm not suggesting we use leather in the 41st millennium, but the brown looks quite nice with the red. So with some Ashabti bone, let's pick up the purity seals and the various ropes and tassels and accessories that adorn the captain. Retributor armour is my general go-to gold. Again, we'll pick up the belt buckles. There's various rims. There's about 8 blood droplet gems on this thing, and I always forget something on each one, so I end up going back. The halo there as well, and the weapon muzzle. Lead belcher here. Now I'm using the lead belcher because the Vallejo dark aluminium is lovely, but it is quite thin because it's an air paint, and whilst I'm not dry brushing here, I wanted something thick just to sort of overbrush those ribbed sections. I didn't want it to go into the cracks. So I love this black Templar contrast paint just as a general use. Black, it just flows nicely. For Blood Angels, I've always found green purity seals, again green being the complementary colour on the colour wheel, just adds that little bit of something different as opposed to another red. So using a Cabalite green as a base, but we will go in and highlight that up later on. So there we are, there's most of the base colours in. Just going back with Mephiston red at this stage to correct any mistakes and get it nice and neat, ready for shading. And I'm going to do the shading in kind of 2 distinct stages. Firstly, we're going to do some panel lining. Some people would argue that's not shading, but to me it adds depth and it adds contrast. And that's where we're going to put a dark coloured paint into the cracks and crevices. We're not going to use a wash here. We want a nice clean effect. I don't want it too dark and grimy, so we're not going to cover this thing in Nuln Oil, which would be, you know, an easy option. We're going to paint in, similar to the box art, a darker colour. Okay, corn red and a black of your choice. Corn red's got a lot of pigment in it. It's base colour. It really does hold its colour well, so it'll take a lot of black and it'll still have some saturation. So we've let this down with quite a lot of water. It's not glaze consistency, it's thicker than that, but it's thinner than you'd probably use your average paint. We use the tip of the brush to run that into every crevice, every little crack, and it just adds separation to each of those armour joints. Every part of that model, we run a dark line. So there we go, you can see the difference there. A lot more depth to that model already. Looks quite nice as it is. But we will go in now and take that same colour, I'm going to let it down much further. You can see how transparent that is just in the back of my nail there. This is going to glaze some shadows onto the lower edges of the armour panels. Now this isn't strictly kind of perfect lighting technique. This is done by a lot of the sort of box art, heavy metal painters, but we're going to take it a little bit further than that, to be a little bit darker, a little bit dirtier, a little bit less subtle than they do it. I just like that slightly more shaded, shadowed effect. So there you can see on the chest there, we have shaded the bottom half. It's quite obvious under the knees, bottom half of the armour panels. And again, when glazing, the direction of the brush matters. Where you lift off the brush, it will leave the most pigment. So we work in a downward motion and lift the brush off in the darkest area. Okay, time to highlight. My recipe for Blood Angels, Evil Sun Scarlet, followed by Wild Rider Red, and then kind of a fleshy tone. Again, some of the official recipes use towel light ochre. I don't have that paint currently, so I'm just using this skin tone from Vallejo. So I'm adding a fluid retarder to the mixture here. One of the biggest issues I have with edge highlighting, particularly when you're using smaller brushes, is it drying on the brush so quickly. By the time you've got it on your brush, you get it on the model, you get a few millimeters of a highlight and it starts to dry. So these products, they slow down the drying. Now, things like normal flow improvers can also slow down the drying, but I find this works a bit better. Definitely gives you more working time. You'll still need to water down the paint because I find a bit like a medium, this doesn't really water it down. So you add this in and add a little bit of water and you can just work so much longer between having to wash off and reload your brush. Really helps. I'm going to start off with Evil Sun Scarlet. We'll let it down so it flows off the brush and we're going to do what we can call like a chunky highlight. This must not be the thinnest line you can do because we're going to go over it soon with thinner lines. So you want to leave yourself plenty of room to go over these highlights with thinner lines later. So this should be 2 or 3 times thicker than your thinnest line. So as you can see, I'm going quite thick. Now we've mixed in some Wild Rider Red and we're going in now. And we're not covering up all of the Evil Sun Scarlet. We're working at the edge of the panels, but the line is thinner than the previous highlight. So it gives us a nice subtle blend almost. And we're going to get every single edge. As I say, we're definitely influenced by the box art here. We're not quite following it to complete spec, but every panel is going to get a highlight in true Eavy Metal fashion. Now, I felt the highlights were lacking a little bit of pop, so I took a little bit of Fire Dragon Bright, which is a lovely bright saturated light orange colour, and just mixed that in. So deviated from the usual recipe there. We do that final edge highlight with the Fire Dragon Bright and skin tone mix. So you can see the difference, there's one leg highlighted, the other one not. Okay, if you find that it's gone a bit pink or a bit orange and all of a sudden your lovely red Blood Angel no longer looks red because the highlights have taken it either too pink or too orange depending on what colours you've used, we can glaze some of that red back in. And I'm using here Blood Angel's Red contrast paint because it's lovely and transparent. Water it down heavily and we're just going to tint the entire area, and that just gives it that red saturation whilst retaining the nice blends in the highlights. So let's do the rest of the model like we did that leg. Evil Sun Scarlet, Wild Rider Red, and then we'll use a little bit of Fire Dragon Bright mixed with skin tone for the final edge highlight, getting thinner and thinner each time. So there's 3 distinct stages of highlights. Now on that last highlight stage, you're using the sculpt to glide the edge of the brush along. Almost done. Let's just shade down those metallic areas, and this is the only place on the model I'm using a sort of traditional wash, but again it's a very directed wash. You'll see we'll go with the Agrax Earth shade on those the areas that we painted the sort of bone colours before, and the Null Oil on the metallic areas. Certainly the gunmetal metallic, the gold, again I'll go with the Agrax. Could use something like Reichland Flesh Shade as well on gold, that works really well. I'm quite happy with Agrax. So there is our armour and various accessories done. Let's get that weapon case highlighted. Now, instead of just a plain old grey highlight on black, I quite enjoy Dark Sea Blue by Vallejo. I think it's similar to something like Incubi Darkness from Citadel. It just gives a slightly different colour to sort of a boring grey. It's a lovely rich colour. and then we will add a little bit of white into that mix and highlight a smaller area, the real kind of tips of those feathers you can see there. Just testing it on the palette that we can get a really nice fine line. So leaving some of the original highlight colours showing and just touching each of those. You could dry brush this if you wanted to, but I wanted to try and do a really controlled highlight. So exactly the same approach to the weapon casing. We'll go with the dark sea blue and medium grey mix, followed by the same mixture with a bit of white added to just get a really fine line. Use the sculpt, run the edge of the brush down it. Okay, Mournfang Brown and XV88, they're a nice pair for highlighting browns. So we'll do a thicker highlight again with the Mournfang and then a finer edge highlight with the XV88. Don't tend to buy the Citadel sort of air paints. I just, my local store had the air paints on offer. I think they were trying to get shut of them, so I picked it up. It just means you don't have to thin it as much. Okay, we'll go back in with that original shabby bone and just pick out each of the individual fibres in the rope. Again, if you're really good with a dry brush, you could get in there and gently kind of drag it over the surface, but I'm just going in and trying to touch each of the tops of the rope fibres just to reinstate some of that colour that the wash knocked back. Auric Armour Gold, again, the edges of the gold to make it pop, bring back a little bit of shine after the wash has dulled it down. And a nice bright green. I'm using a Pro Acryl there, but you could use something like Moot Green to highlight the purity seal. Okay, grab your favourite nice bright silver and just catch the edges of our kind of gunmetal colours to give them a little bit of life, a little bit of contrast since the Nuln Oil shaded them. Okay, so I do use contrast paints, and it's not often I use them as a proper contrast paint, but this is one of the rare occasions I do. This is Space Wolf's Grey. Love it for things, you know, it's pure white undercoat here on this wing, on the shoulder pad. Straight in with Space Wolf Grey, and it just behaves wonderfully. Does exactly what you want it to do. Doesn't stain, sits in the grooves perfectly. You know, you can wick away a little bit if it's too heavy. Okay, onto the cloak. For speed, because it would take me about 5 coats of Shabdy Bone through the airbrush on the lining of the cloak, and because this is a black prime, I'm just going over it with my sort of regular black paint, which I think in this case is coal black, and that's so if I make any mistakes, I'm not painting back over it with primer. I can actually just use my regular black colour, and we'll just wet blend in a little bit of Cabalite Green. Don't have to wet blend, just find it makes for a subtle transition. You can take more of a glazing approach if you want, or even a dry brush approach. Loads of different ways to do cloaks and cloth. Okay, so our head. Primed this, because I didn't want to obscure any detail, I primed this in a mixture of my black primer and a skin tone to kind of get me part of the way into those shadow colours whilst avoiding an unnecessary layer of paint which will obscure some of the very subtle details. So I'll go in with my darker flesh tone, leaving just the deepest crevices in the original undercoat colour. And then we'll go in with a nicely thinned down lighter flesh tone and start picking out those upper areas, leaving the eye sockets, you know, the creases under the lips, under the cheekbones. We'll leave those darker. Okay, Japanese uniform from Vallejo. It's a nice sort of mustardy colour. Again, blonde hair isn't really yellow, and I found in the past it often turns out quite yellow, so I found that this is a nice colour, nice sort of mustardy yellow. It's better than, I suppose, a true yellow. while that's drying, I'm just going to do the next highlight. Back and forth across the head here, just for speed. While one area is drying, I'll go back to the skin. I'll add a little bit of an ivory colour. You can just add a touch of white into your existing skin tone colour. For the very last final highlight on, say, the tips of the nose, the eyebrows, the cheekbones, and the chin. Lock in with a little bit of dark aluminium or lead belcher, or whatever colour you prefer. Those non-organic materials, and we'll touch a little bit of Nuln Oil over them to give them their shade. I'm now just running some Agrax Earth shade between the hairline and the skin to give it a little bit of separation. And I'm popping a touch in the eye sockets there just to get some more definition. A tiny little bit of corn red, watered down just to tint the lips. You know, he's not wearing lipstick, but it's just to give a different colour than the skin. And we'll drop a little bit of that sort of dark red tint under the eyes. Finally, we'll use ivory for the eyeballs, and for the iris here, I'm going for a dark blue, Cantor blue in this case. Okay, Agrax Earth shade on the hair. Once that's dry, we'll go back in with Japanese uniform. Then we will mix in some ice yellow from Vallejo, which is a lovely highlighting colour. It just retains a little bit of saturation instead of using pure white. We'll go in it and individually pick out the tops of those sort of tops of the hair. So there's our face, our head, ready to go onto the model. And here he is, based in line with the rest of the combat patrol. A little bit of Vallejo green pigment. Again, I wanted to use some green on the base, but not in a grass sense, because again, the green and the red go together nicely. Hence the choice for the green. The green's on the cloak as well. I'm quite happy with him. I'd say probably about 6 hours total painting time. It's more than I'd usually do for rank and file. But given he's our captain, he had a little bit more of a special treatment. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, give us a like. It's really appreciated. It tells us to keep doing what we're doing, and it'd be fantastic if you would subscribe as well. Thanks for watching.